Today I'll be talking about new code assistance features in our desktop products. First thing I want to point out is that everything I'm showing here today is very much a work in progress. So not everything is finished. There's going to be some placeholder content like UI graphic stuff. There's definitely going to be bugs. And any of it is subject to change before release. So just because you see something a certain way with what I'm showing here today doesn't mean it'll be exactly that way when it's released. Okay, so here are the things that I'll be touching on here. Current state of chat notebooks. The reason I'll be talking about chat notebooks is because the new code assistance fundamentally is based on chat notebooks. So if you're not familiar with those, we've had them since 13.3. I'll give a quick recap of how those work. I'll explain briefly LLM Kit, which is a new product from Wolfram that you'll be able to get directly through your Wolfram account, where you will no longer have to deal with API keys from external services to run LLM-based functionality. So I'll talk about some of the limitations of what we have for chat notebooks and motivations for how we might want different ways of interacting with an LLM for assistance in product. So there's two main ways of doing that, which I'll talk about: global chat and inline chat. We also have a new feature coming for basically a really powerful autocomplete. And a few other ways to hook into the code assistance. And then if there's time, I'll talk about some of the underlying tech that makes this stuff work really well. So now I'm actually going to close these slides to run these demos. Okay, so quick chat notebook recap. So it's a special notebook that you can get through File, New, Chat Enabled Notebook, and you basically have these chat input cells that let you talk about the stuff in your notebook with an LLM and ask for things and whatnot. So I have notebook content here. I can talk about it here. It can do stuff with that. And this is nice for let's say like a prototyping type of process where you're kind of experimenting. You don't know exactly what you need or how to get it, and you kind of have this back and forth going through there. So I can say something like, and it knows what I mean by it here because it's clear from the context, like it's the last thing that we talked about. So one of the limitations of chat notebooks is that we've previously had to rely on external services. So if you wanted to use them, you had to get an API key and account from another service like OpenAI or Google or any number of those, which ranges from a little bit annoying to extremely difficult depending on the service. I won't name names. So the first thing that I want to show is we now have a solution to that, something that we're calling LLM Kit. So, we still have all these other services here if you do want to use them directly with your API key. But the default going forward, unless you select otherwise, you'll just be going straight through Wolfram. One of the things that enables for chat notebooks in particular is we could start making assumptions about what types of models are available. Up until now, you could have selected any number of these services and any number of models within them, and chat notebooks kind of had to do their best to make that particular model work, and we couldn't assume things about what other models you might have access to. Because one of the things that we might want to do is do more than one request to an LLM per input. You can do more complicated things like embedding and whatnot, but we can't really do that if we're depending on an external service, because we just don't know what everyone has access to. Okay, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about LLM Kit, because I'm not the best person to answer questions about that whole product, but that's coming. It will also let you use things like, LLM synthesize without having to go deal with API keys and all that. It's all hooked up to the same underlying technology. Okay, so another thing, let me get a new notebook here. So I showed that example with a chat notebook, and I had chat mixed in with regular notebook content. Now, let's say I have a notebook that I intend to publish at some point. So I can still, you could take a regular notebook and you can convert it to a chat notebook through the toolbar here, enable AI chat features, and then I can say something like, I wasn't sure how to do that, so I'll ask the AI. It'll give me something. It'll do something a little bit stupid there, but that's okay. LLMs do that sometimes. I'm just going to pretend that it didn't. Okay, so now I have what I wanted. I didn't have to write the code. I just asked for it. But this isn't, like I said, this is a notebook that I intend to publish or share in some way. And this isn't something that you want in the notebook. It's sort of just something you wanted to get an answer out of it, and then you want it to go away. Or on the other hand, maybe it's something that was more complicated and there was, quite a bit of explanation there and you learned something from it. You do want to keep it, but you don't want to keep it in this notebook because this is something you want to publish, and this is not part of the material that, the consumers of your notebook would be interested in. So what you would typically do, you could just delete that. But again, it's not ideal if you always have to be deleting content like that, and you're losing it. You could put it into another notebook and save it, but you'd also have to copy other stuff to make sure that the context makes sense. Another option of what you could do, I could say, oops, copy the wrong thing. Oh wait, no, that is what I wanted. Okay, so I could say, so if I'm outside of the chat notebook and I say that, this obviously doesn't make sense. This is funny. It actually just guessed. It didn't actually see this. But yeah, so if I'm talking about, just to prove it, yeah, so this is a typical response you get. So a chat notebook only sees what's in the notebook and above that chat. So there's nothing here. It couldn't say anything about it. So for this to work, I'd have to copy this over here, say it again. So now I have another notebook, and I can, copy the content back into my main notebook. So this keeps my main notebook clean. And then I can save this separately if I want, but that's obviously very tedious. We don't want to have to do that. What we'd really like is something that's very natural. So I can select this and I can say to, everyone watching right now that I want to do something with this. And you know what I mean by this. We want something that's as natural as just pointing to something and then saying what you want. Which doesn't really work the regular chat notebook. So here is what we're currently calling, I guess we don't really have a name for it. Tentatively, it's like a global chat. So now we have these new buttons in the toolbar here. I can click this button to show the AI chat window. So this is just like a chat notebook. I can have a conversation, but this notebook knows about other notebooks and my selection. I'm starting to think I might have something cached wrong with this sine wave. Let me clear that. Try one more time. Okay. I do not know where that sine wave plot is coming from now. Okay, so this is same interface as a chat notebook, just like before, but I can effectively point to things in my notebook and ask over here and have my chat running. And it's basically, I don't have to have my chat embedded in line with the content that I'm talking about for it to make sense. And another thing I want to point out here, this is one of the areas where this is unfinished. So I said plot that with the red line here. This window over here, if you were just reading this, that wouldn't make sense because what's this talking about? What will be coming that isn't implemented yet, there'll be an indication, probably here, that says there was content used from another notebook. I can't say exactly the specifics of what that will look like or how you interact with it, but there will be an indication that there was other context pulled in. So yeah, you will have complete context in here in some way or another. So the idea that it knows about your selection, I was able to select these cells and talk about it. It's more, it can handle more granular selections as well. So I can select this, for example, and say, what does this option do? And it should know what option I'm talking about based on my selection. Yeah, the aspect ratio. Great. Okay. So another thing we can do with this, if we want to change topics, so let's say I want to talk about this now, these two things kind of go together because they're kind of talking about the same thing. And what you want to do with LLMs, like in a chat notebook, you would use a chat delimiter to separate context. You always want to start a new context whenever you're changing topics, just because long contexts are fine, but if you're jumping around from a lot of topics, you're going to confuse the LLM and it's going to produce worse results. So we have this new button here that clears and it starts a new context. And then I can say, I can ask about this now, like a new different thing. Okay. And one of the things I mentioned earlier that we wanted is the ability to have your chats appear separately outside of your working notebook, but you also want to potentially keep them. So you may have noticed this has a title here, Understanding the Golden Ratio. What happened was it automatically saved that chat. And I have a list of them here. So I can go back to this Understanding Aspect Ratio and Plots. I'm sorry if that's a bit small. This doesn't actually magnify. So that I can now go back to my previous chat here. And again, this action menu here, this is very much a placeholder. There's actually a much nicer interface that's been designed that the UX team has worked on. It just hasn't been implemented yet. This is just a placeholder. There's a lot more controls and ways to interact with that's coming. So, and what will be coming in here, and the underlying functionalities in place, we're just putting the UI together for it. You'll have the ability to search these. So I actually have a lot more here than listing. So I just put like a sensible limit on this. There's probably like 100 of them actually in there. So making them searchable is pretty important if you want to keep a lot of them. But there'll also be an option to include these in long-term memory. So like, let's say there's something, that kind of represents something you work on often, and you don't want to have to keep reminding the AI that, this is a project you're working on. You will be able to save that chat into a long-term memory, and it'll recall parts of that chat automatically. And you'll have the ability to include or exclude different chats from that long-term memory. Okay, so some other new stuff that's really cool that you don't get in regular chat notebooks. And this kind of is one of the things that was enabled by LLM Kit, and us being able to know exactly what models we have available, is I can say something like this, which, if you ask that in a regular chat notebook, it'll probably give you the answer, and if it gives you the right one, it's just going to be doing it from memory, and you don't know if it's actually right. So, these really large language models have essentially memorized a whole bunch of information. It actually made a mistake here the first time, but it corrected it. So yeah, that's not too bad. But the fact that it even knew that there was a resource function from resistor color code is based on some underlying technology we have with built on vector database object and semantic search. So there's a large vector database where we generate embeddings from the things you're talking about and search that vector database for relevant documentation pages, various pages from the resource system, and those are automatically pulled up into the prompting, so it can see that this is a relevant thing, and it knows how to use it. And the model itself does not know about that resource function. It's generated as a prompt on the fly based on the type of content you give it. Well, I would have preferred image synthesize here, but these are technically correct as well. But again, this is something that the model itself probably wouldn't know about just based on its own knowledge. It really requires that underlying knowledge that we're providing through retrievable augmented generation for it to be able to get that correct answer. Okay, so another thing to point out, this sources button here. So I showed this and this new context button. This sources thing, this is not implemented yet. It's coming soon. But this will be another important feature. This is what's going to let you control what gets pulled into the underlying prompting. So for example, this notebook here was one of the things that was pulled in when I was talking about things in my selection. We will have a menu that appears here that lets you control like which of your notebooks are allowed to be used for context, for example. Like let's say you have a notebook open that isn't at all related to the work that you want to chat about. Maybe you want to uncheck that so it can't see it. Or maybe you have something that has sensitive information that you just don't want an LLM looking at. You could uncheck it there, things like that. So choosing which notebooks it can see, that's one of the features that's definitely coming in the first version. What's coming after that, maybe in the first version, will the ability to attach files here as well. So maybe in the first version, we will support notebooks and Wolfram language files like package files, scripts, things like that. And then it could know about, like, let's say, what Packlets you're working on, for example, and you can ask questions about them. What will probably come later are arbitrary file formats. So eventually, anything that is supported by import, we want you to be able to attach a file to this and be able to talk about its contents. But that's coming further down the road. So, don't be looking for that in the first version that gets released. Okay, so I mentioned there were two new chat interfaces at the beginning. So this is, tentatively I kind of call it a global chat, or I guess it doesn't really have a name yet, but this one. But there's also an inline chat. So let's say I don't want to save something in here. I just want a quick one-off thing. There's another button here for inline. And I can ask, that pops up a little chat input field right where your selection is. And again, this is very much placeholder. And this is being worked on. So I got what I wanted, and it's gone. And that's it. So if you want something simple, you just, like it's a big complicated grid with, fancy formatting or a graphic with a ton of options, stuff that you just don't want to type out. That's a great way to just get it quickly with a simple natural language description. I do see that there are a lot of questions there, and I'll try to speed up so I can get to those towards the end. But the next big feature that I want to show off are content suggestions. I'm gonna fix one thing. Okay. So I can now generate auto-completion. So let me just show there's a toolbar button here. I can hit that. Again, this is placeholder. This will be improved. And it generates sensible content to stick in that plot there. Now I want options. These are all sensible things to generate there. And now, like a chat notebook, these also, I just used the key binding, by the way, to do the same thing. These also can see context the same way chat can. So it can see the above things. But it doesn't really know what I want to do next. So you can see that these are related to the thing that I just did above, but they're not really what I want. It's just kind of making guesses. So here's a neat way to make this work really well. So I'm starting a code text cell. So I'm basically prompting the LLM and documenting my code at the same time. And now when I generate my completion, awesome. That's exactly what I wanted. And I've documented what I'm doing here in a sensible way. Okay. More to show with this. Okay, so this also has the retrieval augmented generation for documentation and the resource system, things like that. So I can say, get current space weather data. And it knows how to find something that does that. So another thing, it doesn't just generate code. So I'm now in a code text cell again. So this is not code that I'm generating here. So it knows the style of the cell I'm in, and it generates content that's appropriate for that style. So it just generated the next caption for me based on that. That looks wrong. Or maybe I was wrong. And this inline chat here, asking for it to fix something, this has become a pretty regular part of my workflow. This is pretty handy, provided it gets the right piece of documentation. And I don't think it is, unfortunately. Yeah, it's stuck. Close enough. Okay, so anyways, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I do want to show that it does know about all sorts of styles. So I'm in a title cell now, space weather data analysis. It can complete regular text. And now I'm going to show something that can potentially go a bit off the rails, but high risk, high reward is also the most impressive here. When I'm between cells, it can generate arbitrary notebook content. It takes a bit longer, and there will be a progress indicator coming there, but I gave it the hint visualizations, and now it should be generating plots for me. I think that's pretty cool, and I could just keep going there. Of course, for anything important, you obviously wouldn't just accept everything that an AI spits out at you. You have to still do the work of making sure it's what you want. And if you keep doing this a lot, an LLM will just start repeating itself and getting less and less interesting. So you got to pay attention to what it's generating. So, don't make a habit of just blindly accepting anything that it generates. Also, you can also rewrite parts. Any content that you want as well. So maybe you just want to reword something. You can also select text and regenerate over it as well. Okay, so this is just a neat example I wanted to show. How am I doing for time? Oh, running pretty tight on time there. Okay, so that's all well and good. Let me try to get to some of these questions. Will a notebook be available? I don't really have a notebook for this. My slides were just really 2 slides, one showing the outline, and the rest of this I've just kind of been generating on the fly. The LLM kit will be extra, so it's something you subscribe to with your Wolfram account. I don't know off the top of my head how much that is or the details of it. Can you use code assistants to learn the Wolfram language? Absolutely. So one of the new features that we have here, this doesn't magnify, but if you see that there's a new cell insertion point here, if you wait a bit, it says need help getting started. I can click on that. The underlying prompting here is, it was just something quick to implement. This is going to be improved, and it'll have much better information about an actual tutorial for helping a new user. So things like that are coming. Is this going to be Wolfram's LLM or another company's like ChatGPT? So it's going to be a collection of LLMs that you access through Wolfram. The main point is that we can look at all kinds of models out there and figure out which one works best for a particular application, and then we can rely on that particular model through our service for that particular application. Like chat notebooks, for example, you would choose LLM Kit as the service and Automatic as the model, and then let LLM Kit decide what the most appropriate model is for that. Currently the max number of tokens allowed by a given LLM service provider can severely constrain the possible use cases. Under the LLM Kit notion, will there be a need to track the number of session tokens consumed? So number of tokens is still going to be a thing that's kind of unavoidable for LLM. So any particular model will have a limit to how many input tokens they can have and how many output tokens they can generate. What will be available when this releases is something, comparable to, the big foundation models out there from other providers. I can't really give much details further than that, though. What is in the current pre-release for 14.2? I don't know the exact build dates for the pre-release, but if it's somewhat recent, you should have some of this in there. Some of the things that I showed you today, I was working on today. I was running uncommitted changes that I was working on, 15 minutes before this started. So you're not going to have everything here in a pre-release 14.2, but you might have some of it, depending on the date when that was built. How much context is going to the LLM with each query? It depends. So it tries. So the chat notebook code tries to be intelligent about what gets sent. So if you have a gigantic output, for example, maybe something larger. So if you had something like this, that would be a lot of useless tokens to send to the LLM if I were to ask, oh, this isn't set up as a chat notebook. But, if I were to ask, like, what's the total of that list here? We wouldn't send this entire thing to the LLM. Chat notebooks are pretty smart about, choosing what context to actually send, and it trims things down to reasonable levels and has a lot of heuristics for doing things intelligently there. So the amount of context that gets sent, it depends, but it's also not stupid about just blindly sending huge amounts of nonsense. If you select non-textual output cells, will it still answer questions right? Yes, there's actually a bug right now where it isn't seeing images, which I will fix that very soon. But it is a multimodal model, and it will see images. So if you select an image output, for example, it will see it and have a native understanding of it. Please train it on image to code related tasks. Training isn't something that we're ready to talk about yet. Can you custom specify a way to switch between backing models? So yes, you can already do that with chat notebooks and all the LLM functionality with, the service providers that are out there. So if you want to switch between Anthropic and OpenAI models and all that, you can do that and also choose their individual models. And you can do that with chat notebooks. You can do that with the LLM functions. But initially, you will not have the ability to do that with LLM Kit for chat notebooks. We are kind of depending on very specific models for specific tasks. When you're using LLM Kit, when you send one evaluation, one chat input, that might actually rely on several LLM requests to actually achieve that. So there's one main chat evaluation, and then perhaps several other requests for using different models and perhaps different task types as well. So that's why we're saying that's automatic, because there would be a number of different tasks and subtasks you would have to specify models for. The notion of sources and the ability to select between them is great. Can't wait to get RAG functionality. Yes, and it's going to be good. LLM Kit available for beta testers right now? I don't know. That's not really my area. Also, what is in the nightly builds? So I think if pre-release testers, if you're getting nightly builds, you should get something very close to what I'm showing you here now in a recent build. Oh, think science, autocomplete suggestions. Yes. The autocomplete, actually, I surprised myself with how well this is working. Much better than I was anticipating. Having a code assistant that works alongside the main workbook is great. Yes. So it's something that initially, I hope I pointed out why you might want a separate interface, because some people have questions like, why have chat notebooks and this chat and then an inline chat? Like, what's really the difference between them? I hope I made it clear, like the main reason, but there's also additional features coming to each of these that sets them apart even further. Like these sources that are coming, those probably aren't going to be integrated into the inline chat at all. It wouldn't really make sense to do so, because that's just supposed to be something that is very local to your notebook. Whereas this chat will also see multiple notebooks that you might have open. So you might have definitions for your functions in one notebook, and your exposition in another, where you're using that function, and you want to ask something in this chat. It can see that you used a function over here, generate this error, and it can say, oh, in your other notebook, you made this mistake, and that's why it generated that error, or something like that. Will there be a way that I can check the cost of OpenAI API through Wolfram chat-enabled notebook as well? So you can't check costs through the chat notebooks. I don't think they expose anything like that through their API. I'm trying to think if there would be a way to implement that. I don't think there would be a reasonable way to do that so that you could see it in product. I think you're just going to have to go to OpenAI. Like if you're using the OpenAI service, you're going to have to go to their site to see updated pricing. For RAG, how do I turn my notebooks containing images and formatted text graphics into plain text strings? That's a great question, and I have an answer for you. Give me just a second. So there are two resource functions. Wait, I don't have an option to reply here. Okay, so it's not letting me reply directly, but if you go to the function repository, so import markdown string and export markdown strings, I publish both of those in the function repository. These are the underlying functions that are used for converting arbitrary notebook content back and forth to plain text. So markdown is basically like the first language of almost every LLM out there. They'll start speaking in markdown unprompted, so you might as well go with what they know. So that's what chat notebooks are doing under the hood for these conversions. So if you want to use the same representation that these chat notebooks would use for notebooks, you can use those functions to convert back and forth. Let's see. Can you give it multiple shots and use agents to let it plan out engineering steps? Stay tuned. So programmatically, we have something in the works to do that sort of thing. Chat notebooks, I don't know if there's a good way to expose that, to kind of customize it, but the underlying behavior of what sending an input to a chat notebook or to this global chat or the inline chat will soon be doing something very similar to that, where it's going to be more agent-based with kind of specialists to do different tasks. But I can't think off the top of my head how to expose a way for users to customize that. But you'll definitely have something programmatically. I don't know if it'll be 14.2, but it will be coming. Let's see, was I missing anything? Okay, so I think that was everything. Thank you, everyone, for checking this unfinished, this unfinished product out, and bearing with me with the bugs and placeholder stuff. I'm pretty excited about this. I hope you guys are too.